Imagine a world where more women had the time to fully explore their genius. Welcome to She Rebel Radio, the UK's podcast for women leaders and founders ready to unlearn conventional rules and lead their businesses of significance. We've been hailed for counter-status quo ideas and a whole dose of feminine perspective. This is our 8th series. My name's Lulu Minns and I host retreats and create spaces for women leaders to explore their genius. And today I'm going to create that same space right here for you on this podcast. Welcome to episode 124 of She Rebel Radio, Writing for the Sisterhood with Katherine Bradley. Katherine Bradley started her professional writing career in 2020 and has already written 3 books called To Keep You Safe, What I Did, and this year's release, The Sisterhood. The Sisterhood is a powerful new take on the George Orwell classic 1984, but written from a feminist revolutionary perspective. Julia, an original character from 1984, is the powerful lead. We learn her backstory and what's going on underneath the surface with her role in the Sisterhood. Prior to this, Katherine enjoyed a 20-year career managing services of homeless people in Brighton before retraining as a teacher. She now teaches English in a secondary school academy, whilst also finding the time to teach creative writing to adults. And all whilst being a mum too. She holds a first-class degree in English literature, and her writing has been described as heart-stopping by one of my favourite authors from back in the day, Mr. David Nicholls. And call it a synchronicity, Katherine and I were connected originally by our very own real-life sisters. Katherine, how are you doing today?
Oh, amazing. Thanks. Yeah, lovely to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Lulu.
Yeah, I've loved reading your book, but I would really love to start with One Day in High Fidelity by David Nicholls. I think that's the author who quoted your writing as being heart-stopping. I'd love to start with a book that has been life-changing or significant for you over the years.
I don't think I could just stick with one, and I know you're going to want me to, but I mean, I could go back to The Lion, Witch and the Wardrobe when I was a kid. I think that's when I really fell in love with story. That idea of being able to have transformation in your world, this idea that you can be in one place, but you can be fundamentally different in another place. I just thought that was so exciting. And I realized that you probably hear that example all the time, which I think, just that says how great that story is. So yeah, I mean, I could wax lyrical about lots of stuff. I also fell in love with The Stand by Stephen King, and that dark, atmospheric, difficult world. So yeah, I like really different worlds when I'm reading. I like lots of books, obviously. I'm an English teacher by trade. I like lots of different stories, but I like something that really shows me about something different.
Yeah, and we really can transport ourselves to a different world with words in books. And I love your example, especially as we've been connected through our sisters, because we definitely used to play things like Lion, Witch and the Wardrobe and like climb through TVs and pretend we were in a different world. And not TVs, we had like a knocked out one, but my cousins used to. But all of that stuff that we do as kids to kind of transport ourselves into different worlds. And I think books are a huge part of our creative imagination with that, aren't they?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I remember how many of us our age have been in our parents' wardrobes wondering why the back won't come away. I remember I set up a detective shed in my garden, and I made a little sign for it. And I sat in there like the famous 5 with my sister, waiting for some awful thing to happen that we would be able to go out and solve. And nothing happened. We just sat in the shed.
Yeah. We used to make all sorts of dens, and I remember my sister bought me a pink panther, and we'd go off and hunt pink panther and bring it back to our den. And I've been vegetarian for 30-something years. I don't know if that's why, but that's something we used to do.
I have as well. So maybe there's something in vegetarians or something. I've been a vegetarian since I was 5. Anyway, maybe that's not a great advert for vegetarianism, or maybe it is.
Yeah, me since 8. So well done. So what created the shift for you from managing services to teaching to finally writing books? And is that something you'd always wanted to do, being a lover of stories?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I really, I've always loved story. and I really enjoyed my job. Worked, it's difficult, isn't it, to sort of cover 15 years and to sort of put it into a few sentences, but worked predominantly with homeless people, people with chronic and acute mental health problems, substance abuse, and really loved it, and worked in the voluntary sector and for the local authority, and just basically got promoted to the point that I was just sitting behind a desk looking at spreadsheets and managing staff, and have got quite far away from the interactions with people that I really liked. And I felt, and I expect there's many of us that would feel the same, that sometimes after doing something for 15, 20 years, you do think, I'm ready for something else, actually. I need maybe new challenge or new excitement, or I want to feel differently about the world that I live in and just sort of seeking that change. And I've always, by that time I was writing, I definitely wasn't published, didn't have an agent. That's a whole long story in itself. But I had signed up to a course at Sussex University doing creative writing. And then I decided to do my English degree. And after that, it just sort of felt, well, this is a great transition then to actually go and teach. So now I get to talk about English all day long, get to talk about story, get to understand the mechanics of story in a different way than I would have done if I hadn't has studied it and taught it. So yeah, I mean, it has fundamentally changed my world. I don't sit behind a desk anymore, not often anyway.
No, and I often, because I work with women through transition, I think we can be the mistresses of it, that we do seek new challenges, or we have new different phases that we want to kind of be in and understand. And I love how you've created a whole different world for yourself. As you said, you love that stories were able to do that for you, and that's something you've actually done yourself, as have I. What have been some of the challenges of that as well?
Well, I think it's interesting you said about the coaching, because I think where I was working was quite sort of fast. They were thinking ahead at the time, and they got a number of staff to do a coaching qualification, and the idea was that we would coach each other. And I think I sort of pretty much ended up sort of coaching myself, which is, you'll know, as a coach, is not a good idea necessarily.
Yeah.
But I mean, in terms of sort of what the challenges were, and I think coaching oneself, one doesn't think about the challenges. So that's like one reason why it's not a very good idea, perhaps. The challenges were, I had been expert, if you like. If you do something for 15 years, let's agree you're probably relatively good at it. I'd been pretty good at my job, and then becoming a teacher. And obviously I work with people who are retraining of different ages in my current career. And then you have to go back to basics, and you really almost sort of don't know anything and have to be prepared to embrace the fact that you don't know, that you are starting again. And yes, you are perhaps an older adult than some of the other people in that position. And perhaps you do have a lot of skill sets that you can draw on. But I would say it's hard not knowing what you don't know, and then it's hard knowing what you need to learn. So it is challenging. It can be challenging financially, of course. Change in salary, it's change in circumstance, like your daily routines. The change is really quite fundamental, I have to say. Exciting, wonderful, brutal. It's definitely worth thinking about, and I have no regrets. But it is something that I think I probably underthought at the time.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I know when I left the legal profession, I had my first business idea, had no idea what I was doing. And I love that you said exciting, wonderful, and brutal, in no undetermined words. I definitely agree with you on that. And, you really have to get to know yourself actually on a different level as well, of those blind spots and those things that can, be quite uncomfortable.
It takes a different type of resilience, I think, and I think that's maybe the wonderful bit, but the brutal comes first before the wonderful, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. It does, definitely. So what have been some of your biggest challenges writing, and as a creative writing teacher to adults, what's some of your tips for those who are wanting to start, and especially for women who have lots of other distractions going on, like children and all of those kind of things, and what they're needing?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with the first question insofar as what's challenging about it is that you really desperately want something that ultimately is outside of your control, and you have to live in that space with lots of rejection on your own, because it's a very sort of personal thing for a really long time, and years, I mean years, and that's really hard. It's really hard to want something and just keep getting rejected. And also publishing is quite a difficult industry to be rejected in, insofar as the fact it's so slow, because obviously the act of reading takes a long time, so nobody gets decisions very quickly, because people have to read the material and they have to make decisions on the material, and that can be quite a complicated thing, and it depends on also stuff that's out of your control. Like, you could write an absolutely fantastic novel, but the market might be flooded with that, for example, so
Yeah.
it does make it very slow, and then you have to go away and you have to write something else. So the slowness of it, the fact it's outside of your control, if I want to take up weightlifting, for example, that's something I can just put my time into, and I can control those results much easier. I think in terms of sort of like advice, there is always, so there is really sort of like advice that is well worn, that you hear authors say all the time, but because it's true, first of all, you have to put something on a page and then you edit the page. And I think that when we have ideas about stories that we would like to tell, they're so big, they're so like big clouds that we can't quite harness and put down onto a page, because it takes so much time and so much decisions, like whose perspective is this, how am I going to tell this story, where do I need to start, because you might not start at the beginning, you might start at the end and work your way backwards, and I think it can feel quite overwhelming. And I think that when we're overwhelmed, and I'm frequently overwhelmed in life, I think that might be middle age. I think we end up then not doing, or sitting with it. So I think that's the difficulty, really, is sometimes not being content to sort of live with a really sort of not good first draft. It's just not very good, and then accepting actually that is very much, writing is very much about putting something down, then improving it some more, then getting some feedback, and cutting what you love but making it better as a result. Yes.
Yeah.
It's not a great sell. I'm not selling it. I want to sell writing. I think it's fabulous. I think we should all do it.
well, I love your honesty, and that honesty really comes through of what's hard, comes through in your book as well, the sisterhood, which we'll talk about more in a moment. But I love that, those who are listening to this episode, the amount of uncomfortableness that, if you're wanting to write, that you've got to face is, embrace rejection, making decisions, not being in control, and having time, which is something that women have less of as well. So there's so many hurdles to go through. So thank you for being so honest.
Well, I think there's like two ways that one can present oneself. Can't, isn't that true? You can sort of gloss over everything and have a sort of Instagram, like, oh, it's so great, everything's so easy, and sort of present that. Or you can just be more honest. And I definitely think it's far more helpful to other people. It's certainly far more helpful to me when other people are more honest about what the challenges are. But I would really recommend it. And I feel very positive about writing. And I would really encourage others, if that's something that they're interested in, to definitely do that. Definitely. And the writing community is very encouraging. People reach out, they encourage each other, give little bits of feedback, signposting, that kind of thing. So it is a lovely community to be part of.
Yeah, amazing. That's good to know. Now, what many people self-publish these days. Why was getting a publisher important for you? And how long did that take?
Ages. Probably about 10 years, I think, in total.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, when I started, actually, self-publishing wasn't a thing. And I definitely see the advantages to self-publishing. But I think it's like everything, isn't it? I think where you win in one way, you lose in another. So, for example, I have a fabulous editor. I've worked with her for years, Catherine Armstrong, and she's so gifted that the idea of doing it without her would be like really it would be too hard. I think I really value somebody else's particularly her input into that. And my agent, Stephanie Glencross, is fabulous as well. She's a very talented editor and has edited for people like Belinda Bauer and loads of big names. So I feel really, really fortunate, blessed to be working with such talent. And for me, if I was to self-publish, I wouldn't be able to draw on these fabulous women to make the story better.
Yeah, amazing. So your very own sisterhood going on there with your writing
Yeah,
process.
absolutely. Yeah.
And how has the creative process been different from a more linear career? What and do you have like a pattern that you like, oh, I'm here again with this idea and I know what needs to happen next?
Yeah, I think writing sort of feels sort of seasonal for me, maybe partly because I'm a teacher. So I tend to, get ideas down and make good progress in the summer and then huddle around the fire. Literally, I sit on a beanbag by my fire with a glass of wine in the winter, sort of like coming to the end of the process. I think, yeah, I just think that sort of the writing process is sometimes you can feel like you've got something you're just burning to say, and I think that when you get to that point and you're ready to go, and then you can stick with it. And I think very much sort of a little bit most days, even if you're just sitting down for sort of 20 minutes, is probably the way to do it, because it just keeps it alive, keeps it going.
And how I love that, and we love seasonal and cyclical
Yeah.
phases here on She Rebel Radio, and it's quite a feminine principle I find as well.
Yeah.
How would you describe that feeling of when you're burning to say something?
Well, it's a sort of moment of excitement. So I could be on my Peloton, for example, and I just think, yes. I mean, people will hear me talk to myself, and it's just like and it can happen during the book as well. So I really love twisty thrillers. That's what I love, and I would say that's the commonality between all of my books, is that they're twisty thrillers, and some of it I know those pivotal moments where there's change. And I'll go into that writing it, and then sometimes I'll have that idea, another idea of a different sort of twist or perspective I didn't see, or a character I didn't understand because of this, and then I'll oh my gosh, I didn't know that. And if somebody else is in the room, I'll be like, what didn't you know? And it's like, oh, I couldn't possibly explain it to you. So it's a really lovely process, really, writing, that when you've got that idea, you really want to spend time with it, and then you miss them when they're gone. When I finished writing The Sisterhood, I was very sad not to spend time with Julia anymore. I still miss her. And my other characters, I had the same. I mean, that lessens over time. And I do realise that your people listening might think I'm a very interesting person, but you spend so much time with them.
I totally understand that, even as
Yeah,
an avid reader. I probably
yeah,
read about 40 books a year, and
wow,
it's always
yeah,
been a thing for me. I miss when I've really enjoyed a book, and
yeah.
I've really enjoyed your book,
Oh,
that
thanks.
I miss the characters. I'm like, oh,
Same.
there's a little loss there. And I find that I race to
Yes.
the end because I want to find out what's happened. And
Yeah.
then there's kind of like a loss and a grief process of like, oh,
It is, yeah. And as a
found
writer,
out.
you
But
go through that, and I think that, yeah. Oh, I still got the characters in The Stand. Yeah, I think they were the first characters I really missed, actually, in Stephen King, and I think it's a huge epic dystopian sort of post-virus story, and I really missed those characters, and I think they were the first characters that I really missed. And I think when you've created a real character because you missed them like a real person.
yeah, 100%. Now, talking about the dystopian model, it was really brave to take on a classic, such a classic of George Orwell, one of his most famous books, 1984. What was your inspiration, and why did you have to write The Sisterhood?
It really came to me in a moment, actually. I was teaching, so we teach dystopia to our students, and I was reading them 1984, and I've written The Sisterhood, so it's definitely a standalone thriller. So people don't have to have read 1984. I would
Yeah, I would.
completely encourage them. Yeah,
I was going to say I would back you on that because I've read 1984, but it was so long ago.
yeah,
I can
I think
remember
so.
that much about
Yeah,
it. But yeah, you can totally dive into The Sisterhood, whether you've read it or not, or whether you read it 25 years ago.
Yeah, or even if you've just heard about it. And I think there's so many of those terms, aren't there? Like Big Brother is watching you, Big Brother, there's all this sort of terminology in it. And I think, I would encourage people to read 1984. I think it is absolutely one of my favorite books, hugely powerful. Obviously, I love it. So I did come to it with a great deal of sort of love and reverence. And I've obviously read it as an English teacher so many times. I know it inside out. But when I was reading it, I was reading it to um, uh, year nine, actually. So kids at school, and we every year we talk about dystopia, and I talk to them about how they feel about the levels of surveillance they live under, for example, and the different things that like CCTV, for example, and what's it? Yeah, all of that, and how they feel about it, and they're far more comfortable with it than I am. And
Yeah.
then I think it changed that. Then there was COVID, and obviously as a teacher, I could spend so much time talking about COVID and schools and kids. But when they came back, and we were talking, and I was doing that scheme of work again and talking about 1984 and reading it to them, it felt different. It felt like it had obviously taken on a new resonance, and it felt far less theoretical and felt far more the possible. So I think there were sort of two issues really. One was that I've read a lot of George Orwell, and he really felt really passionately about the dangers of government and societal control. And I think that if he was here now, and if I was to say to him, do you think, you bang that drum loudly, do you think people heard enough? If I'm honest, from what I've read, interviews and stuff, he would say no, that he
Yeah.
would say, no, actually, this is more of an issue than it's ever been before. So first of all, I felt that, and I felt that that maybe needed furthering. But
Mm-hmm.
also, I was really caught by the character of Julia. She's such a silent character. So, for your readers who've not read 84, it's about Winston Smith, and he's living in a sort of dystopian government, and actually probably not that different than we would recognise from some really controlling governments around the world, that are under dictatorships, etc. But anyway, he's living in that, and obviously it was written in 48, so it's set in the future. And he has a girlfriend. He acquires a girlfriend. He's not allowed to have a girlfriend. Hate is valued. Love isn't valued. And he gets a girlfriend called Julia, and she appears in some scenes. And really, I've taken those scenes, some of those scenes, not all of them, and I've created what actually Julia was doing, what her incentives were, how she was coping with living in a controlling dystopian government. Because I think that the way that dictators and that kind of control, I think the way it lands with men is different than the way it lands with women. If we were to
Mm-hmm.
think about Afghanistan, for example, the freedoms that are often afforded are often given to men, they're not given to women. And
Yeah.
I felt that there was, obviously I love things like The Handmaid's Tale and things like that. And like really worried about us becoming a cashless society, because in The Handmaid's Tale, Atwood's so good, isn't she, insofar as the fact that she explains that the women lose power and control because the banks give their control to men.
Yeah.
So if I would have to
Yeah.
get my money from my husband, and we see that around the world. And I think in a cashless society, that's definitely more
And
possible. And in
yeah,
fact,
and it's something that isn't that far away from, our grandmothers, didn't have access to bank accounts and things like that. And also what I found really interesting in your book and, in the original 1984 is that separation, or I keep calling them division politics at the moment, is a way to
yeah,
control people. And I
agreed,
think that we're seeing so
agreed,
much separation and division in the world right now.
agreed.
I'm kind of quite horrified that people can't see that. And also, we've had recently, governments potentially going to be scanning WhatsApp messages for any criminal
Yeah,
activity. That's my background. And also, anyone who's accused of anything, being able to stop them making any money online and actually control their accounts. Which again, people go, oh, well, that person did X. We don't know that at this point. Which
it's so
again,
concerning.
it's so concerning. Yeah.
And the younger generation, I think, are possibly less concerned than us. And Orwell was very concerned. He wrote Animal Farm, and he went round to the bookshops, and they had put it in the children's section. And of course, he was talking about this very thing, with what was going on at the time, with Stalin, etc. And that's why he wrote 84, was because people still weren't listening. So
Yeah.
I think people talk into an empty space, and I think it lands with some people and not others. And I just think that for women, I think we often feel that I don't know. I think society expects us to sort of ask permission for stuff, permission to be.
Yeah.
And I just was just so interested in this character that she wasn't even given a surname. She wasn't given a job. There was no backstory to her. And Orwell, when you're a writer, you can only write so much. You can only show so much of a world, and he was showing Winston Smith's world, and Julia was just a walk-on character. And I just felt that there was a real opportunity there to really talk about women and about friendship, and about how important friends are, and how we can support each other, and what we give to each other, and the importance of love, actually. So I really tried to show that sort of contrast, the importance of love in a world that is filled with hate. And I just thought there was a real opportunity there to sort of, Orwell doesn't need any furthering, but I wanted to bring his fabulous ideas to an audience that might not go and read 1984. They might be, actually, I want to read about women, I want to read thrillers, I want to read about friendship, and that kind of thing. So I thought there was a way of taking his ideas and writing a sort of twisty thriller that hopefully really says a lot about just how cool I think women are.
Yeah, no, I love it. And, from so important, that female perspective, and it's so exhausting for us as women. And again, it's something that I think men don't fully understand or comprehend, of always having the male voice and the male
Yeah.
authority and the male perspective of everything. We grew up with it in such a way, with books. As you said, Julia was silent. And again, that doesn't encourage women. And we're here to evolve. I understand that, but I work with women, and women are still struggling to use their voices. And as you said, also seeking permission. We've been very conditioned with that. And I love the work that Reese Witherspoon's doing, for example, is taking women's stories and making them into TV production. And
Yeah,
you
great.
can,
Yeah,
you
she's
can see
fabulous.
yeah, and you can see adverts now, can't you? I can tell when they've been produced by women, because it
Yeah.
resonates.
Well, it just talks to us directly, doesn't it? I mean, I think the way that women communicate with each other, I mean, personally, I think it's better. I think on average, women use 2,000 words a day and men use 1,000. And our mental health, I think the statistics would prove that the relationships that we are able to forge with each other actually give us huge benefits, I think. And
Yeah.
families are statistically, if they've got a daughter in the family, and it's just that they tend to have better well-being, and it's because of the value that we bring. And I just really wanted to write a sort of novel where there were women that had no voice, and how they claim that voice, and they do it together, and it's very much a team effort, because
Yeah.
actually I think that's the reality of our worlds, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it is absolutely, and I love that. And I love that your main characters in the sisterhood all have a unique gift that they bring within that
Mhm.
collective kind of energy of their voice. And you've got, fire or zest or wisdom. Do you think we as women all have a unique gift to offer, and what might some of yours be?
Yeah, I definitely do, and hopefully more than one. And I just think that actually sometimes we need other people to show us what we've got. And you have conversations with people, and they say, "Oh, but you're so good at this." And I think it's really easy for women to go, "Oh, no, I'm not." And so that's why, sort of at the beginning of this, we were talking about like the struggle, if you like, in writing or retraining. And I live with that struggles, and the struggle of raising kids, and just the struggles of that we all have at the moment, really.
Mm.
And I would say that if I was good at anything, then it's sort of tenacity, it's keeping going. And I think I am not blessed with anything special other than I will just keep going. And I don't know, I think the world is built on women that just keep going.
Yeah, it is. And I think you highlighted, from us talking about the sisterhood and how we support each other. I think as a group, as a collective, and we've grown up with sisters, and I think when you grow up with sisters or a sister, you kind of understand that support that we can give to each other and that understanding. And I think that women have a real gift for conversation, for community, and relationship. And what we're talking about, the concerns in the world and division politics, which is a big part of the work that I do, is like, we can change it. And as women, we need to do that together. So I love that message is in the book.
Yeah, I just think world is always better with people working together. So it's like what women can bring men as well, and I think smart men realise that, don't they? That what women offer is just as useful to the world as what they offer, and how we can all just help each other out.
Yeah, and I think that's really increasing. I've certainly noticed, more and more men in the work that I do becoming interested about that, which is great to see in the last few years. 100%. So the ultimate message in the book is what we'd sacrifice for the greater good, and I find women in the sisterhood do have a default for sacrificing for the greater good, sometimes to our detriment. How can we perhaps cultivate it more positively, the sacrificing, and are there any messages from the sisterhood on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I sort of incorporated quite a lot of ideas, like the suffragettes, for example. I was teaching that in class yesterday because that sort of crosses over into some of the texts that I teach. And the idea that, I've got a friend who writes fabulous spy novels about the resistance in France, and just this idea that, that some women have had to make huge sacrifices. They have had to do that, and that the freedoms that we have and the benefits that we have in society and for us are built on that. And I did sort of want to recognise that a bit, and just this idea that for some people they've had to do that, but do we all want to do that? Probably not. I think ultimately, we've got to keep something nice for ourselves, haven't we, in our life? You do live once, and I think that kind of being clear, and I say this as somebody who's interested in coaching as well, is having that idea about what's important to us, like and if that's writing, for example, making that space for that, or whether it's swimming, or because I think it's very easy to sort of be swept up and do for everybody else. And I find that a sort of constant battle in my own life, that I just provide content to students, or because I have a managerial responsibility in the school as well, just supporting them with their relationships with each other and how they interact with each other. Just that sort of constant provision of content to other people. It's keeping a little bit for oneself, is how do you do that? And I think that's probably the most important thing. I think we all need that, don't we? A little bit of self-love, a bit of self-care.
Yeah, 100%. And then, whatever that gift is and what you're bringing to the world, and there'll be a number of things, is we do that better. And I totally agree in terms of agreeing with the freedom that we have. In one of the trainings that I do, I talk about my grandmothers, and actually, they didn't have half the amount of freedom that we have now, but that always makes me feel a sense of duty of doing something with it that can make a difference, that fits
agreed.
into.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, it's a type of honor, isn't it? It's like honoring what went before, and then passing that baton on to other people, I think.
Yeah, and also I think being grateful when you recognize we don't always have good days, of thinking, oh, actually,
Really
I've
not.
got this, and this, and that's something that the women before didn't always have. So what is next for you, and where can we find you and the
Yeah,
book?
so this, yeah. So the Sisterhood is published by Simon and Schuster, and there's a beautiful special sprayed edge version with the eye that you'll remember, the big symbol of the eye. Even if you read 1984, you might have seen it on the program Big Brother or whatever, that well-known symbol sprayed on the edges. So it's out in hardback at the moment, and it's paperback in March. You can get it on audio as well, obviously. And then my next book is scheduled for 2025, actually, and it's another dystopian that's very much sort of thriller, female character trying to find find her place in the world, having to be transformative as well. And you can see that, right at the beginning, I was saying that that was what I was interested in and always loved in other people's books, and how she changes her world, really, despite some pretty tricky circumstances. So that's what I like to write. I like to put somebody in a really tight situation and watch them work their way out of it.
Yeah.
So
Is that how you define a twisty thriller with a
I think so.
female feminist narrative?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, like, and you want to see that change in that character as well. You want to see them gain voice and independence, and and find out how ultimately they have to save themselves.
Yeah, and that tenacity and that resilience you talked about comes across of showing actually how strong we are as women.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being on She Rebel Radio, Katherine. It's been
Thanks for inviting me. It's been fantastic. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to She Rebel Radio. If this episode has inspired you, please pass it on and share with at least one other incredible woman. Don't forget to also hit subscribe and leave us a review. You can find out more about me and my work at lulumins.com or on most social media platforms.